Brad Matthews, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thank you for having me.
You have a martial arts background. Tell us about what's happened. What got you into it in the first place?
Well, that's a long time ago. I got involved in that with it's just something to do. I was playing squash, and at the squash courts there was a
Funny, that's a good place.
there was a guys doing some taekwondo or something in the squash courts, training in there. And I was watching that. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting, and I got involved, started training with them, and then I met some other guys who were doing it was I think it was Zendokai karate. The instructor was Peter McIntyre, and this is in Rockhampton. So,
Peter, yes.
Yes, he was a very smart man, and there was another guy called Dan Fruenlord, and they had a security company, and they ended up getting involved in doing some security work, and then they transitioned into Kyokushin karate, and Trevor Field from Mackay was sort of part of that process, and got to meet a few of the guys from up there, and we were training at the Sun City tennis village.
Was it something that you took to?
It was kept me very it kept me a little bit fit. I wasn't drinking. I didn't used to drink in those days.
How times changed.
I was quite a fit young fellow, and it kept me occupied. And it was because we were doing some security work at the same time. It was sort of something that I thought, oh, I better keep doing this. Otherwise, it was another way of earning some cash. So,
how effective was it? The Kyokushin karate that you're doing. How effective was it in the security work?
I think probably not so much from a I can use the techniques on people, but it was more around the confidence it gave you that you could take care of yourself. It was, and then from there I moved into Jiu-Jitsu. So I was invited along to a Jiu-Jitsu grading by a fellow called Alf Ward, and he was from Nakido Jiu-Jitsu, and we were watching that, and I walked in and they were doing throws and different things, and I thought, oh, well, that's good. And afterwards I was speaking to him, and I said, you don't do much fighting. How do you know how good you are?
Have a bit of a cuddle.
Yeah, and it's not, doesn't look really exciting. So he's taken this knife out of this Wiltshire knife out of his training bag, and he's handed it to me, and he says, "Cut me with it." And I went,
real knife?
A real knife. It was the one that you use to carve up your roasts, and he said, "Cut me with it." I went, "Don't be silly." And so he slapped me up the side of the head and go, "Go on, cut me." And I've gone, oh. Next thing I'm on me backside up the, a couple of metres away, and he's got the knife, and I'm going, I want to learn how to do that. So that was my introduction to Jiu-Jitsu. And so and then I was doing Jiu-Jitsu and Kyokushin at the same time, and then eventually it became just doing Jiu-Jitsu. So
why go away from the karate?
The Jiu-Jitsu gave me more. It expanded on the skills. So the reason why I sort of continued, followed the Jiu-Jitsu path rather than the Kyokushin path was the Kyokushin was, I grew up around, people like Brad Madam and Trevor Field and these guys who are, national, world champions in Kyokushin. And it was, I thought, yeah, well, that's really well and good, but it's not going to do what I need to do. I was working in nightclubs at the time, as well as being a chippy. So the nightclubs were sort of that bit of extra cash that you sort of got, and there's basically your social life as well. So, but yeah, so learning how to defend against knives and broken glass and sticks and multiple people and all that type of stuff was something that Jiu-Jitsu was able to provide better than Kyokushin. So.
What do you think of the BJJ these days? It's the new thing. You're a traditional Jiu-Jitsu practitioner.
Yeah.
What do you think of BJJ?
I think they do it really well. What they do is done really, really well, and it has the traditional Japanese martial arts also included groundwork and things like that. So our style originally came from like cherry blossom. I think it was the style was the name of the style was cherry blossom, and so it involved ground positions and it was a structured scientific approach to how to defend yourself on the ground. It was similar principles around dealing with unbalancing and traditional locking and that sort of things. So it's sort of when you say traditional, it was stand up and on the ground. Probably more stand up than judo, but not as much groundwork as judo. So, but the BJJ side of things, they do really, really well. So I've seen a few different schools do that. I was actually able to train with Absolute Jiu-Jitsu, which is one of Mario Sperry's schools in Sydney, and that was an interesting experience. And
what happened?
Well, they were really good at what they do. So some of the subtle movements that enable you to get out of it and position into an escape and those type of things. So they took that to the nth level, whereas the stand-up side of things was a little bit, the Kyokushin part of that was I was able to manage on that. But once they got you onto the ground and that, you were stuffed.
Is it like human chess? The BJJ?
I think even the Kyokushin's like human chess.
Any martial art?
Any martial art, yeah. You actually, it's not so much you dominating somebody else. It's you working on somebody else's mistake. So they give you the opportunity to, end it or finish it or whatever. So, and at the same time, you're trying not to give them an opportunity to finish it. So, it's little bit like human chess, I guess. Yeah.
How far have you taken it, and can you still learn more?
Oh, definitely. You can always learn more. And I spent some time as a coach with Kyokushin Jiu-Jitsu with one of I think his. That was in Brisbane, and we went just basically coaching. So there was a new startup school, and we were assisting in that process. And the basics, just understanding the basics, the more you focus on that, the better you get at the other parts. So when you look at it and you see all these different techniques and all these different moves and all that, it really comes down to footwork, body movement, the ability to understand, the range of movement from the body and, where the limitations exist. So.
What's the big difference then between, say, traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Probably the same difference between Catholics and Presbyterians. They're still doing the same thing. They've sort of got the same overall, the same overall philosophies and things like that. Just that they reckon that mine's better than yours. So,
is there much of that these days in martial arts?
In some areas, there is.
Because I know back in the day you talked about that Bob Jones and Zendikai, and or Taekwondo, that ours is better than yours sort of thing. And as a master said to me recently, any martial art done well is effective.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the better you are, the less that becomes a factor. So the less that, it's my style's better than your style. I mean, in Mackay, I ran a school for a number of years up there at the PCYC, and we had people from everywhere come along and train, and we learnt stuff from boxers, we learnt stuff from, Zendikai, from, Kyokushin, Shotokan. The judo guys came along. They didn't like the idea that we were getting thrown around without mats, so they organised to get us some mats. So.
Soft.
Back in the day. So these days, you probably couldn't train like that anymore. But back then we did. And that's another thing I've noticed over the years is the I don't know, I won't say soft, but it's the focus of people is more around, rather than learning a skill and learning techniques, it's all about, I don't want to get hurt.
Isn't that why you train in the first place, so you don't get hurt, though?
Exactly. I think it's the reluctance to sort of take risks. It's been... The people are more reluctant now to take risks because they don't understand themselves, I guess. So they don't know what they're capable of, and so that's why something like a martial art helps people understand what they're good at, and basically how they can develop and understand who they are and how to deal with challenges and problems. And I think that's where, with people understanding their resilience and being resilient, they've never been tested. So they've been given all these things on a platter,
Is it that McDonald's generation that we've got these days? They want a quick answer and a quick fix and a quick solution?
There's probably a little bit of that. But also, and I know as a parent, you sort of don't want your kids to get hurt, so you sort of, watch out for this, and you at times you can risk being a helicopter type parent.
Hang on, what's a helicopter type parent?
Well, as a helicopter pilot, you would know. You hover over the top of them and make sure that they don't get, they're always in your downdraft, Yeah,
remind me to use that a little bit later. But so is there, and that's one thing I've found teaching boxing, is there no real mongrel in the current generation as you see it?
I think there is a meanness in the generation, but there's no grit that's coming through. It's hard to find people with grit coming through. Whereas,
define grit.
So grit is something that you just keep persevering with something even though it's uncomfortable. So you'll I do remember when we're doing some of our training, like Kyokushin for instance, we'd stand there in a night, and in 2 or 3 hours we'd punch out 1,000 punches and 1,000 kicks, and that the effort, and you do that weeks after weeks after weeks, but then when it came time to, in a competition or something like that, and you're throwing those kicks, you are dead tired, but those kicks are coming out and they're still happening, and you don't have to think about them, you don't have to worry about them. And there's a certain percentage of the population that never actually experience that. And then there's other people, there's a smaller percent that sort of take it a little way, and then there's a very small group of people at the top of that pile that take things and they grow and develop and push, like our Olympians and our, the people that are doing, the dance, training for dancers, and they practice and practice and practice.
I think they call
months.
them the 1%ers, the 1% that continue and become the top of the pyramid.
Absolutely, yeah. But then there used to be under the 1%ers, there was like a 25% of the population or 30% of the population who would, they were the ones that you rely on, and they'd get things done and be able to do that. And it used to be a bigger percentage, whereas now it's that's shrinking a lot smaller, so.
Being a Mackay boy, you were teaching Jiu-Jitsu up there. You talk about the Brad Madams, who was quite an exponent of martial arts in general. They were real halcyon days.
They were. It seemed that everyone used to want to train, and you'd. Whereas nowadays everyone sits around and looks at their phone.
Hang on, I'll just.
It was sort of you had a purpose. You were actually connected to a purpose, and you actually had a goal, and it was part of your social framework and things like that. Whereas these days, with the rise of that social networking and all that type of stuff, people are more disconnected, and they're less motivated to achieve things. So,
are you still motivated?
In different areas, yeah. So I'll probably expand on a little bit of so understanding your character strengths is something that sort of I've always been interested in. What am I good at? What are the skills that I have? And so some of my character strengths are things like problem solving, curiosity, love of learning, humour, and
I haven't heard that one yet, though.
There's always time for a dad pun, So, but usually when you can lean into those strengths, and one of my strengths is around love of learning and being curious, naturally curious about certain things, and being able to lean into that. So currently I'm leaning in more into that positive psychology space, and then getting an understanding of what motivates, and what our purpose is, and how do we motivate others to achieve their goals, and how to tap into that, and get that, how people can find out about their grit, discover their grit, I guess it would
We'll
be.
do that.
Yeah.
We'll get onto that in a minute, but I want to go back to the days you're doing security. Must have been an interesting time doing security at nightclubs in a country town, which were a bit rough and ready in those days.
They were interesting times, yes.
Must have been some good stories. What are the highlights?
The highlights.
What are the lowlights?
The highlights are, an example is one time I wasn't a big lad. I was probably 80 kilos ringing wet. I think my fighting weight was around between 82 and 85. I didn't want to go over 85 because that put me in the open division.
The big boys.
And there were some good fighters up in that space. So in the about 82 to 85 was that my weight at that time, and there wasn't like working in nightclubs and things like that. There wasn't a you couldn't rely on your size, so you had to work on being able to be personable, and I think one of the early lessons that I got from Peter McIntyre and Danny Fruenlord was that people are out there to have a good time. They're you're basically there to help look after them and look after the other people around. So if these people are out of line, It's about going, come on, you're out of line. Come back next week, but,
I don't want to bar you.
Night's over. Yeah. So, and it certainly helped in that conversation piece and being able to get your message across without actually being threatening and taking a fighting approach.
Was it an advantage being a smaller person or a bigger person, or was that an advantage or a disadvantage?
I don't know whether it was an advantage. It was all I had. It was what I had to work with. So,
but okay, in a nightclub, someone might say, "Well, okay, you're only small, and I can take advantage of that."
There were times when that was there, but it was. And I'll give you an example of that. We had I was working in Rockhampton in Trix nightclub, and in Trix nightclub you had to walk up a set of stairs. There was the ticket box on the corner, and then you walked 90 degrees up another flight of stairs, and then the nightclub was up the top. And I was standing on that landing, and there was a number of bikies came in, so they had colours and all that type of stuff on, and they had these big knives on their belts. And I said, "Oh, guys, you can't bring your knives in here." And I was told in no uncertain terms that they weren't taking their knives off, and it wasn't going to happen. And I said, "Look, I can't let you in." And I didn't even see this punch coming. It hit me, like clocked me. And I went, "It's still not going to change anything. You can't bring your knives in." And our mate just looked at me and he's gone, "Fair enough." And he's taken it off and given it to the girl, and
checked his knife in.
Checked it in, and they got a ticket and went upstairs. And as I've turned to look upstairs, I've passed out. And so that was an interesting time. It was like delayed reaction from a punch, but it was that type of approach. But I never had any problems with those guys in the nightclub at all, And another time, they'd brought some people out of the club and were taking them down the stairs, and this lady had taken her shoe off and embedded it in the back of one of the bouncers' head at the time.
Gotta hurt.
And she was looking at swinging it around and taking it on, attacking myself. Who was trying to keep other people out of the road. And so it was these guys one of these guys had stepped in the road and clocked her, put her on a backside. But so there were different times back then. So.
It must be hard to be a security guard these days, because with the one punch philosophy these days, must be a hard job.
I reckon it these days, and not so much from the skills and techniques would still be the same. Like being able to communicate and that with people is different. But the drugs and that are out there these days, and the amount of people that are using these chemically enhanced interactions would be very challenging.
I suppose back in the day it was a skinful of beer and go home, fall down, go to sleep.
Well, there's that, or speed, or those type of things, which you're able to identify and pick up. Whereas these days it's really difficult to tell. There's some people that and they seem normal, and then they turn around and they're just psycho.
Does that worry you as a father? Does that worry you that these sorts of drugs are now out on the streets and readily accessible?
It's not so much the drugs, it's more what it does to people and how people react when they're under those drugs. So there is just no sense making of some of these reactions that happen. Like they take for instance, some of the guy in Melbourne that got in his car and was driving up and down the street. Like, how do you make sense of that? those type of things. So that's concerning as a parent, but it's for the kids to learn and you give them the skills and stuff to hopefully they've got the decision making about
being a helicopter parent.
Well, you don't want to be a helicopter parent. You want to try and give them the skills so that they can make decisions and take care of their own selves. So you want to set them up for success. You don't want to be the cause of their they're only successful because you are there. You want them to be successful on their own. So.
Become their own person?
Absolutely, yeah.
How hard is that to let your kids be their own person?
It is terrible. It is terrible. I don't know. I spent a bit of time out fishing with Dad, so and trying to understand how, back in the day, they helped us become our own people, and it was more, at the time I thought it was like, I'm just going to go and do my own stuff. Whereas, and Dad would sort of give some, guidance and things like that. And sometimes, in your middle, when you've screwed up and you go, oh, I did recall Dad saying something about this. But yeah, so it's a pretty difficult balance to get. Yeah.
What were you like as a kid?
Terrible.
In what way? What were some of the things that stand out if you were to talk about your childhood?
It was always I had to go and try and do and be and do it myself. I couldn't take somebody else's word that that was at it. Is the stove hot? Oh, let me see. So that was my thing as a kid. I'd always tested things out. Didn't really take other people's word that that was why. I had to find
which led to many adventures.
There was a few adventures, but mainly around motorcycles. But so it wasn't as a kid, growing up and moving into your own house or flatting, and back in those days, it was cool. Don't know whether they flat these days. It's all these PC names for things, but it was. Yeah, you'd sort of find things out, and all the skills that your mum and dad try and instill in you. You go there and you go, if I don't wash up for like 2 weeks, it's probably going to run out of gear or get crook, So.
In the early days, you started out as a chippy, got an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
What happened there, and where did that take you?
So that gave me a skill set that was I even use now. Like I've just finished renovating out the front of the house. Put a veranda on and put a pool in. Concreted and decks and all that type of stuff. So that's something that it was a skill set that was helpful. And I spent a number of years riding motorcycles around Australia, and that was one of the skills that I used to supplement an income. So you'd turn up in a town, go to the pub, and say, "Has anybody got any work?" And you'd they go, "Oh, such and such is building down there, or they're looking for labourers over here, or they need some formwork chippies there," and so you'd go down, put your name down, and see how it worked out, and so that was a set of skills. So between security work and doing bar work and being a chippy, it got me around Australia. So
where did you go? What are some of the highlights of the adventure? Because not enough people, I don't think, go and see Australia. It was the first thing that I did when I was young. Got around, got to see the country.
Yes. Well, I got quite. I went and worked around with they had a flood in Charleville, and so that sort of started a bit of a journey there. I'd already gone up and seen Cairns, and we'd gone to the tip of Australia, and that was exciting and interesting stories. But they're just, we just got by, But out at Charleville, there was some interesting. We'd turn up. That's where I got my bike license, actually, after I'd been riding bikes for about 3 or 4 years, and I got pulled over one afternoon and was told, this is only a car licence. And I was on a motorcycle, and I said, oh, well, you got me. Yeah, so, but anyway, there was without incriminating anybody, we got my licence, so which was good. It was not as strenuous as I first thought, so we got through that process. But then, we went out to the Scrubby Creek BNS Ball, and that was held at it was the gun club at Tambo, I think it was.
Oh, right, yeah.
So Sunday morning, everybody is hungover like you would not believe, and they're doing the clay pigeon shooting first up, which is just what you need with a hangover at 7 a.m. in the morning. But that was an interesting time. But then I went from there through to Alice Springs, and then down to Broken Hill. So from Alice Springs to Broken Hill was an interesting drive.
Because it would have all been dirt and desert.
A lot of it was dirt and desert. I was lucky to be able to catch up with other travellers along the way, and I do recall getting towed about 20 or 30 kilometres behind a caravan, which was an interesting experience along outside of Alice Springs. So.
How come? What happened there?
I'd run out of fuel. It was a little bit further than I thought. So. And we had a 10-metre rope behind a caravan, and spent a lot of time dodging rocks and and things like that. But that was an experience, and as a young fella, you probably wouldn't want to do that again. Second time, but I do another time. We did got up to almost 300 kilometres crossing the Nullarbor Plains, and then that was interesting on a bike. Didn't realise that they had planes that fly overhead. They check speed and things like that. So that was an interesting time. Travelling across the Perth up to Broome, and then cut through and then went up to Darwin. So Darwin was good, and then I got a call from a mate who said, "Oh, we're working over in we're working at Club Med, or Lindeman Island at the time, and they're turning it into a Club Med." So he was working for Tees, and he said, "Oh, you come over and jump on board," and I went, "Oh, okay." So I rode from Darwin to Proserpine, and by that time the bike was just about done. So I sold the bike, and that set me up for Lindeman Island. So it was good.
Who was the best character that you met on the road?
Some of the elders. When we're travelling through, Darwin and that place, there's some interesting. The Aboriginal elders, they get some funny stories, but they are smart people, So they, when you try and get paint Aboriginals into a corner, or our Indigenous Australians into a corner, and say, you must be, fit within our, white culture and stuff like that. It's not really you're not letting them be who they are. I mean, it's not the stories. Like some of the stories that they told us about how connected they are with nature and how they can track stuff and you know, being immersed in that in the land and that type of thing is certainly a skill set that, you know, people in the cities just do not understand. Yeah.
Did you pick up and now apply some of the lessons and learnings that you learned from talking to these people?
I think it's more around don't pigeonhole people into a you know, oh, you're a drunk, or you're a fighter, or you're a angry person, or whatever. It's more about understanding that they, what is it that makes that person interesting and tick. Yeah.
You're talking about pigeonholes because a mutual friend of ours, Jeff Erickson, who I've spoken to on the podcast, and he sort of said he's often, in the early days, was pigeonholed as the Australian champion boxer.
Yeah.
And it's something that he's really worked hard to move away from. Do you think we do that too much to people?
It's human nature. Yeah, we try and simplify stuff, and stuff it can't really be simplified. You don't understand somebody unless you actually, and then going back to something Dad said, you've got to walk a mile in their shoes, and by that time you're a mile away and you've got their shoes, but you don't understand a person, just because they're a champion boxer or they're they're good at something, or that's not the what they are. That's not who they are. These elders and that when we're travelling, they were great storytellers. They loved to drink, but you had to when you got them outside of that space and you got them sober and you started asking questions about what does this do, and how'd you get to here, and why are you doing that.
But you took the time.
And you got to take the time. If you don't take the time, it's it's just like driving past something in a car. You miss it. So yeah.
What did you take away from that trip around Australia in yourself?
Pretty much it's a resilience thing. So sometimes I'd turn up in a town and I'd have like $10, $10 in my pocket. Wasn't a big into financial planning back then. But
who was?
Yeah, I don't know. But then you certainly it wasn't. You'd turn up and things would manifest for you. You'd go, okay, well, but you'd need to take action. If I sort of sat around and I don't know what I'm going to do, I'd still be there. So
in a country town, though, the hub is often the pub, and you probably did the right thing, went straight to the hub. Where I was recently in Roma, and I was looking for an old friend of mine from when I used to work there, and first place I headed for was the pubs.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting with the evolution of Roma into an oil and gas sort of epicentre. There's no locals.
No. No, and generally it was the pub or the post office or the general store, like the store, because outside the store they'd have all the Bob selling a trailer, or all the community notices type stuff, or you'd even just get chatting to the people that were running the store, and sometimes the store was the post office or vice versa, so you go to the post office and things like that, but you just get talking to different people. It wasn't really planned, but it was I had a goal in mind. I didn't want to starve.
Did you?
No.
Did you go hungry at all?
No. No, I don't think I ever missed a meal. You sort of put it out there and, work towards that, and and things happened. It was freaky at sometimes, So
You mentioned your father a few times. He must be a real influence on you. How much of an influence is your father on you?
oh well, when I was young, he never knew anything. As I've got a lot older, he knew a hell of a lot. Yeah. So as a person that's he's sort of a self-made person, he grew up as a farmer, and then he became a theologian, and then he sort of worked as a a company director, and sat on boards of various companies and things like that. So he's got a lot of life lessons around, and some of the things that I've learnt from him is around that, that communication piece, and asking questions, and finding out things. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, he'd say, So.
He's got plenty of sayings. Do any stand out to you?
Yeah, pretty much there's more than one way to skin a cat. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Do you?
Pretty much everything that if it's worth doing, you give it a crack. If it's not worth doing, you don't bother. Those two things were the ones that definitely stood out.
They were turning Lindeman Island into a Club Med.
Yes.
Must have been a good adventure to the exclamation mark on the end of the Round Australia trip.
Pretty much that was it, yeah. So it was an interesting time where I'd finished the trip around Australia. I caught up with a couple of mates. We're doing some building, and I stayed on with the maintenance crew afterwards. So we did maintenance. I was the routine, which was according to Francois, the boss at the time. He said, "You get the buggy, you get the walkie-talkie. Your people call you, you go and fix." So that was my job, and pretty much I worked from 4 p.m. in the afternoon through to 1 a.m. in the morning. So if anyone needed anything fixed, I'd go and fix it.
You must have met some interesting characters on the island then.
Yes, we had the Honourable Society of the Brothers of Darkness, who we're a small group of entrepreneurs who didn't appreciate from paying the staff prices of $4 for a can of 4X Gold at the staff bar. So we took matters into our own hands and organised our own supply of alcohol from the mainland. Eventually that became bigger than what the staff bar was bringing in, and so and apparently you have to have a liquor license to sell alcohol, so we moved on from Lindeman. Yes, so that was an interesting time as well, but there was some, living on an island where you walk everywhere, and the fastest you go is like in a buggy, and you get back to the mainland, you get in a taxi and hanging on for dear life. Yeah, so but that was interesting. Yeah.
How did you find the culture shock of coming back to day-to-day living on the mainland?
Well, that was interesting because I turned up in Mackay with a couple of $100 in my pocket and nowhere to live, and I was sort of looking for a mate, and I was going to bunk on his couch there for a while, but I ran into a fellow called Dave Charles, who was just getting starting a nightclub in there called Legends, and
good old Legends.
Yes, it was renovating old Valentino's in there. So, and he needed some security, and so I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll come and give you a hand." And because I knew him from Shark Club and that in Rockhampton and some of the other places in Rockhampton, found a place to stay, and like I said, it all works out. So it's funny how life turns out at times.
What do you put that down to? The flow.
Haven't really thought about that too much. It's sort of more. It's something that if you put it out there. It's you need to have an action, and you need to. If you sat around, it wouldn't happen, but you actually have to go and do something. So I think that is sort of probably a lesson that I've learned. If something needs to happen, and this is another one of Dad's things. If it's up to me, if it's got to be, it's up to me. So you've got to actually get off your butt and go looking.
So you're a proactive sort of person.
Definitely, yeah. You've got to be proactive. Yeah.
Is there enough of that these days?
I'm not sure. Some people are very proactive. Others, maybe not. They wait for things to come, and it's probably sitting on your phone waiting for things. I don't know what they do on their phones.
Is the COVID culture that we're getting at the moment, with the people making more money for not working than when they were working, is it going to create that sort of culture?
When you get something and you don't have to put effort in, that's always a bad thing. So you get something for nothing, which is great if you're walking along and you pick up $5 off the ground and you go, oh, look, I found this. Whereas if that's your lifestyle, where you expect something for nothing, where's that going to leave? Eventually somebody's got to create the something that you're getting. So how does that? That's not sustainable from a cultural perspective. And is this how the Mayans died out? They all went, oh, hang on, no, let's not do anything. Let's just wait and see. All the date's coming. The end of the world's going to come, so let's just wait. It's going to wait for somebody to give us something, and then that's it.
Essentially, we're living on the nation's credit card.
Yeah, I don't even know whether it's a credit card. We're debt. So what do they do? Just print more money. So are we really in debt? And then you've got a country that says we've got $1.5 billion in debt, and then who are they to tell me that just I'm $500 over on my overdrawn on my credit card? What's how does that work? It's all ether,
Balance and perspective. You got from building, you went into OH&S. What was the transition? What caused it?
I see that as you get older, your body doesn't take the same punishment as you used to dish out in the early days. So I spent a bit of time going as a chippy, you go through and you plan jobs, and then you get into project management. And so that project management was the transition piece between that. So I was helping other builders plan jobs and taking looking at their business processes, and then looking at saying, well, hang on, we've got contractors that are taking the piss and charging us huge amounts for and they're causing delays, and the longer you delay on a job, the more your costs blow out, because at the other end you've got we've got loan business loan interests and all these other costs that come out of that. You've got fluctuating rates can impact on your bottom line and different things like that. And talking to suppliers, if you're paying retail for everything, it's just you've got no buffer in there. So it's working with builders to build that buffer into their profit margin. So build because everything had to be so tight. You're competing against other people, and so if you can, make money on savings by buying better, you increase your profits. So, or you become profitable for some of these guys. So, yeah, and a lot of that process came around to that health and safety side of things. So this is around incidents. So where you have a safety incident on site, or you have even a quality incident where you've got to go back and do rework and all that type of stuff. It's about minimising those challenges.
Risks.
Yeah, and risks. Yeah.
Do we take too many risks these days, or is it legislated out of the workplace these days?
No, we don't teach people to plan. So we go, that's bad, but we don't teach people how to plan. So I think that's the biggest challenge for people these days is you get the safety guy who goes in and says, oh, you can't do that. So how then do you eliminate that problem or fix that problem? And the main process is looking at the business as a whole, not as this safety item or that safety item or that environmental item. You look at the business as a holistic approach, and then you go, if we plan things here, we're not going to have that problem down here. And so that's what I do now, is help people in that space.
What's the biggest thing as far as planning goes that businesses really need to look at as far as improving their OH&S?
I think it's taking the time to plan. They don't see the value in I'm spending time planning, even down to the psychology side of things around lassitude awareness. So lassitude is more than complacency. It's about you get used to the risk that you're taking, and it becomes normal. So you're normalising risk. So you're working in a highly risk environment, and it becomes normal. And so it's dealing with that. And so how do we deal with that process?
What's the biggest problem then that the average employer or company, business, what's the biggest risk that's taken in the workplace? You talk about that getting complacent to risk. What are people doing wrong?
It's not what they're doing wrong as such. It's more what we're accepting these days. So everyone wants to do it for the bottom dollar. So in order to do it for the bottom dollar, there are some things that don't get the attention that they need to have. These days, when you've got builders competing against other builders, and you've got your tradies trying to get jobs, and it's this rationalisation of risk. So you go, well, it's not going to happen to me, or it's I'll won't need to do it this time. It's only a small amount of time, and so you rationalise why you're taking those risks, and it's in that space where, because people don't go to work to be safe, people go to work to be successful, and in being successful is whether it's make it a profitable job, or whether it is some people are successful because they enjoy other people's company at work. That's what motivates them and keeps them going back to work. So it's this what makes people successful, what is their reality of success, and then how they rationalise the risks to achieve that every time.
So what makes a business successful then?
Getting that balance. Yeah, it's hard. It's not a tangible thing. It's a and it can change just by through lack of communication or through poor communication. So I've seen another job I worked on was at a Amberley Air Base, where we had I worked for one of the SPOs out there, that they had a special programs office, and they had some challenges around their safety management system. So, and culturally, they sort of moved from a company that was doing stuff to a company that was managing other people doing that same stuff, and they were, the level of communication was not the same as a manager as it is when you're, actually doing the work. So then they've taken, it just required to get them involved in that process, and then they took ownership of certain aspects of that which they had control of, and they felt that they could control. And that was by getting them involved in that, there was visibility then of action. And once you had visibility of action and communication, that culture changed from something that wasn't really beneficial to the organisation to something that was, a standout. People were going, well, what are you doing different? They're just talking better. Yeah, so communicating better.
You went from OH&S into, these days, you're looking at the psychology of safety in the workplace. What are you learning from that?
I think it's just an extension of OH&S or WHS. So safety involves people, and if you don't understand people, it becomes really difficult to do your job. It's not all about you're not following the rules. Why aren't they following the rules? And with positive psychology, and then that's the field I'm sort of looking at. It's looking at it from a different perspective. So you've got, instead of going, what's wrong with you? We ask the question of, okay, so what are you doing right? So when it goes well, what are you doing? What happens if it runs perfect?
Do you have a common answer when you ask that question of people?
No, and that's the good thing. See, the other thing is they talk about from problem solving is these things called wicked problems. So wicked problems, so you got simple problems which are linear type things. It's sort of like following a recipe. So if I follow the recipe to bake a cake, I follow the steps and I get to that's the solution. And then you've got complicated problems. So complicated problems are where you've got, say, putting a rocket to the moon. So there's some are simple problems, but there's a few that require some specialist skills and tools and resourcing and different things. But you can, once you send a rocket to the moon, every rocket is like every other rocket, and so you can send that rocket up to the moon, and you can send multiple rockets. You understand the processes there. Then you have complex problems. Now, complex problems are like raising a kid. Just because you raise one child doesn't mean you can raise the second one using the same skills and techniques and processes. It might give you experience, but that doesn't mean you're going to be successful at that. And there's no guarantee. start with the baby and you go, there's no guarantee that you're going to get that child to, adulthood successfully. So that's where, health and safety sort of sits in that space, where just because something works for one organisation or one group of people in an organisation doesn't mean it's going to work for multiple people in that organisation or multiple organisations. So the other thing is too, you might fix one problem in one area.
Creates other problems.
Creates another problem. Or you go to do the same thing in another area and it doesn't work. And this is because, the complex problems generally have their social complexity. So there's complexities with, because everyone's different. It's very complex, and it's a social complex. So it's not necessarily, so there might be a set of values over here that are not replicated over here. And so you're working with values, and you're working with defined purposes from each individual has a different interpretation of what their purpose is.
In general, are businesses ready to hear that sort of message?
Some are. Others, it sort of takes time. There's still this, even though nowadays this, you must follow the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you're a bad person. Or that only gets you so far. Why aren't you following the rules? Is do the rules make sense? And that's some of these type of conversations. Like even some of this stuff around the COVID, and you look at some of the stuff that's coming out around the rules around COVID, it does not make sense. And so where it doesn't make sense, people are not going to follow that. Whether the penalties for doing that are, big penalties, if you don't follow it, you're going to get that. But if it doesn't make sense, the first opportunity you get for not following that, you'll take it. It's human nature.
What do you think of the COVID situation? Are we getting it right?
It's an interesting scenario for the world, isn't it?
Okay, there's all sorts of problems down in Victoria, and Daniel Andrews is right in the middle of it, and you sort of say about people not wanting to follow the rules. Is Victoria getting it right? Queensland's put the border up. Are we getting it right?
We don't really know. We're doing something. Is it right? What are the outcomes of those type of things? So when you start looking at that from a people perspective, what's the impact of that on people? So we've both got elections coming up. Both states have got elections coming up. So it's going to be interesting to see what perspective that's going to change. Is it people are going to say, oh, look, I don't think they did a good job, or they did a good job, but no, we're not going to, we don't want to go through that again, or are they going to associate the blame? And it's all relative too. So if I'm reasonably unaffected by, border closures or any of that type of stuff, it's not going to, I've got no problems about that. However, somebody who's in the tourism industry, who's basically lost their livelihood and seen their, lost their house and all those type of things, they probably have a lot higher, feelings about that,
But of course, though, if we do change the government, for example, in Queensland, we'll have the same chief medical officer.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And from a wicked problem approach, a change in one area isn't going to change an outcome, is it? So it might change our perception. It might change it'll appropriate blame, because the whole world's in this bit of a blame culture thing at the moment, or blame them for that, or blame them for this, and I'm a victim, and which is another thing. Don't get me started on that. But Getting
I'm going to.
but this process of you can't solve wicked problems with simple solutions. I guess that's where I want to come from in that space. Yeah.
Do we have a victim mentality these days?
The media certainly portrays a victim mentality. I don't know whether that's across the the rest of the population, but it's what the media want you to think. So, and I think the media definitely has a role to play and they could be doing so much better.
In what way? What should they be doing? Because how we take our news on is changing and evolving. Like newspapers across the most of the regional dailies have all gone.
Yeah.
The way we take our news is changing. What could the media be doing?
I guess it's in the framing of the language. They have an agenda where it's sensationalism and it's what sells clickbait and all that type of stuff. So it's certainly no one wants to read about things are positive, or even just to get information that is just the facts is difficult. Now you have facts with somebody's opinion, and they're slanted in with somebody else's opinion. Back when Brian Henderson, I don't know whether you remember him.
Because Brian told me.
He would just read out the news. That's the facts, and that's it. He wouldn't give his opinion or anything like that. And it's all doom and gloom. It's all this is bad. If you don't do this, you're bad. Oh, hang on. And if you don't do this, you're bad. And if you don't do this, you're bad. If you don't do this, you're bad. It's all about the piece. If they were asking different questions or presenting different information in a more positive light, I think it would be. I haven't watched the news for probably 2 or 3 years. I don't sit and watch the news.
What could you learn from watching it, though?
How to be depressed.
Steam and gloom.
Doom and gloom, yeah. Depression. Victim mentality. Woe is us. That type of stuff. Yeah.
You're in the work health and safety industry. What's the biggest risk you take?
Critical thinking. The biggest risk is giving people information or providing alternative thought processes to why they're not why people aren't doing what they want them to do. So why are people being hurt at work? Why are we doing this? And from an employer's perspective, sometimes they don't like hearing that. Well, what are you doing to support these people? How are your systems set up to enable the person to be, work in a safe way? How are you allowing their you've engaged a person because of their skill and their knowledge and their experience, and yet you're telling them to shelve that knowledge and experience and follow this, which is contradictory in some ways to why they're it's basically a butt covering exercise and not a productivity safety related exercise. So
is that the biggest problem you come across these days?
Yeah, so it's businessy. Safety is one thing, and they see productivity as another. And really, those two should go together. And a lot of the time when things happen, it's because they haven't merged those two together, and you must be safe, but we want you to work 60 hours a week and take these risks and get that job done. And we'll pay you extra money if you take those risks and do that, but you must be safe. And you get this cognitive dissonance between productivity drivers and safety drivers, and it's challenging for people to make sense of that. And depending on how this person perceives their being successful at work, they go, well, hang on, I'm getting money. Money is my driver because that helps me be successful, keeps my wife off my back. I can give the kids, what they need, and so I'm going to take those risks. And then when something happens, the company goes, oh, you didn't follow our safety stuff. And they go, well, hang on, you paid me this extra money to go and not do that. I thought that's what you meant. You wanted us to hit all these targets, and we can't do that if you've put this safety blockage in the road. So there's those challenges around that. So the biggest challenge in my place is at work is to communicate that to the employers and say, look, this is what you've put in the road. It doesn't make sense, and you can't meet that with this.
Great way to finish. Brad Matthews, thanks for joining us over the bonnet.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.